Last week, USC and UCLA made the move from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. Now the ACC and the Pac-12 have discussed the idea of joining forces, a, quote, loose partnership that could end with the conferences playing a championship game. Look, it comes down to money and exposure. Conference realignment increases the value of media rights contracts, and if you're not looking for ways to improve your brand in college sports, you ultimately and literally get left behind. Let's break it down. Welcoming two of the four members of the Cover 3 podcast, Chip Patterson and Tom Fornelli. Chip, what do you make of this idea of, quote, a loose partnership between the ACC and the Pac-12?
That it was probably brought up during the no bad ideas portion of the what are we going to do to try to help ourselves for both the ACC and the Pac-12. I don't think we can ever use the word alliance in college sports ever again after the Big Ten got the ACC and Pac-12 to vote against Greg Sankey's college football playoff expansion proposal, only to go and get USC and UCLA out of the Pac-12 and put the Pac-12 on life support less than a year later. So I do think that the ACC and Pac-12, which do have the existing relationship from that aforementioned alliance, they started to say, what can we do to help ourselves right now? And what they do have is a shared media rights partner in ESPN. And so they are probably trying to come up with whether it's a scheduling agreement, whether it is some kind of conference champions play each other's showcase game in Las Vegas. What they are looking for is anything that will potentially give them the opportunity to open up the conversation with their media rights partner to get them more money. Because what the Pac-12 is finding and what the ACC has known is that there is a major deficit in the per school per year payouts. It's around 25 million per school per year right now. It could be up to 50 million per school per year when you're looking at the Big Ten and the SEC over the next decade or so. So anything, absolutely anything that you can do to increase that money, that is what this loose partnership is about. It is in the no bad ideas portion of the damage control for both of these conferences.
A loose partnership doesn't sound all that strong. Doesn't sound very confident. A loose partnership. I don't know about that. It's a loose partnership. It's like me riding a roller coaster. It's me not riding a roller coaster. It's a loose partnership. Meantime, which is what this feels like, a roller coaster this whole summer of college football, college basketball. Big 12 is involved in deep discussions to add 6 Pac-12 schools, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, Oregon, and Washington, to make the Big 12 an 18-team league, the largest in the FBS, if that happens. Tom, what would this mean if the Pac-12 loses all these schools in addition to have already lost USC and UCLA?
It would essentially mean the end of the Pac-12, or at least the end of the Pac-12 as we know it. Like, the conference name might live on, but the fact is, it would probably look a lot similar to what we saw happen to the Big East in the very original round of conference realignment, when so many of the schools from the Big East left to join the ACC and the Big Ten and eventually formed the American Athletic Conference. I would assume that if this does happen and those 6 schools leave the Pac-12 to join the Big 12, we'll see the remainders of the Pac-12, the survivors, if you will, and the Mountain West kind of merge to form a new conference, whether it would still be called the Pac-12 or the Mountain West, or if they would come up with a new name for it. I just think that overall the Pac-12 is already on very shaky ground. Losing USC and UCLA is already a significant blow to the conference, considering the brand power that they have and the history and tradition that they have in the conference. And then you tack on the fact that, oh yeah, it's in the largest television market in the conference. So to lose Los Angeles, to lose those schools is a huge blow. To follow that up with the Arizona schools, Utah, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington leaving, what's left at that point?
Chip Patterson University will be going through conference realignment. CPU. We'll see where you're headed in next season. USC.
We're coastal. Yeah, we can be we can be Atlantic or coastal. We can go either one.
Tom Fornelli Tech as well. He's got to stay in the Northeast, though. I mean, Tom Fornelli Tech has to stay somewhere in the Northeast. USC, UCLA set to join the Big Ten in 2024, while the Big 12 anticipates new members in 2023. But that's in the future. How about the not so distant, future for this upcoming season, where we can wager on college football future? Start the ACC, where Clemson is the favorite to win the conference this year after missing out on the ACC title game last season. Last season, Clemson started 4-3, finished 10-3, a down season by their standards. Chip, does Clemson get back on track this year?
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because we're going to do a lot of hand-wringing about whether or not they're going to get quarterback play from DJ Uiagalelei or the five-star freshman Cade Klubnik that is going to allow that Clemson offense to really take off in ways that we saw with Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. But I'm here to tell you that they can get average quarterback play and still go and win the ACC, because the defense is going to be one of the 3 or 4 best in the entire country. The best defensive line, a group that I do not think is going to take a major step back, even after losing Brent Venables and a couple of key assistants. It's just been elite recruiting on the defensive side of the ball. And even in an ACC that has a lot of good quarterbacks, I just don't think there's enough good offensive lines for them to really be able to hold Clemson back up front. And then I go back to thinking about Dabo Swinney and what he's done even in the back half of last year to create success. He said, we're just going to make things a little bit more conservative. We're going to run the ball behind Will Shipley, who is a very, very good running back, Kobe Pace, who is a great complement, and we're going to play great defense. It's like it's the SEC in 2011 when you look at the Clemson Tigers. But if DJU takes the next step, if Cade Klubnik emerges as a true freshman the way Trevor Lawrence did, now we start to talk about Clemson as a potential national championship contender and a no-brainer ACC championship pick. But again, I'm here to tell you, average quarterback play and this defense, good enough to win the ACC.
Are we sure they're even going to get average quarterback play? Because I'm not sure that that's what they got last year. But I understand what you're saying. My pick personally, and I've had a loose partnership with my brain, between my brain and my heart, not to get too heavily on the Miami bandwagon, but my brain is losing it. My heart is winning. I'm really excited about Miami in 2022, and maybe it's a year too early, but at those odds, at 6-1, I think the Hurricanes are a pretty solid play because, Chip, like you're saying, Clemson's offense isn't great, and we really don't know what to expect from DJU. It could be Cade Klubnik, but either way, this isn't going to be an elite offense. It's going to be a beatable team along the lines of what we saw last year. Meanwhile, Miami's in the Coastal, where if you look around the division, first of all, the Hurricanes might have the best quarterback in the conference in Tyler Van Dyke. And if you look at their schedule, yes, they have the road trip to Clemson late in the season, which will be a problem for them, but it's not a division game. When you look within the Coastal, their conference schedule is very manageable. North Carolina, Florida State, and Pitt all have to come to Coral Gables. Those are your 3 biggest games in the division, and that gives the Hurricanes an advantage. So I think that they are the favorite to win the Coastal, and I think once they get to the ACC Championship, maybe having that game a few weeks beforehand against Clemson might give them a bit of an edge in figuring out how to counter and what they need to work on to improve to maybe knock them off. I think at 6-1, the Hurricanes are an excellent value.
Miami's had a loose partnership with its head coaches for a while. Who's coming? No, look, they got the guy. Mario Cristobal, I'm excited for what he can do back at his alma mater with the Canes. Their win total set at 8.5, while Clemson's regular season total is set at 10.5. As you mentioned, they're set to play each other at the end of the season. Chip, do you think Dabo and the Tigers are only going to lose one regular season game in 2022 and go 11-1?
I do. I'm going to take the over on the 10.5. You mentioned the down year, the year when it looked like everything was collapsing and Clemson was in a free fall. They still finished 9-3 in the regular season. And I think there's going to be a big-time course correction. And I do think that offensively there's going to be a nice changeover as we look at, yes, they promoted from within for Brandon Streeter to take over as the offensive coordinator, but they also brought in some coaches who had been at Clemson a while ago, and I think that there's a lot of new ideas. I think that talking to people around that program, there have been a real challenge in the wide receiver room to step up their level of play, and I think that we will see that. And then finally, NC State, that's going to be a home game. You've got Miami, that's going to be a home game. At Notre Dame is absolutely tricky. Like, that is the one spot when I tell you 11-1, if I have to name my wins and losses, I give Clemson a loss at Notre Dame. But you know what? I chalk everything else up as a W, so I'm going over 10.5 for Clemson.
Oh, Chip, we're disagreeing here again. I'm going to go with the under. I just think that 11-1 or 12-0 is too much to ask of this Clemson team in 2022. And Dabo, if you're watching, take it as disrespect if you want. It's just, I think that this schedule is tough, and I have questions about, like I mentioned earlier, about this Clemson offense with DJU at quarterback, how consistent they can be, if he could take a step forward to where we can consistently rely on them week to week to put up points that they're going to need when it comes to facing some of these better teams on their schedule. And then there is also the questions at both the coordinator positions. Yes, they're promoting internally, and there is a culture in place, and there is a lot of talent on this roster. It's the most talented team in the ACC still. But it's still a new offensive coordinator. It's still a new defensive coordinator. It's a lot of people who are getting in new roles for the first time that might take some time to adjust. So we could see something of a slow start. Thankfully, the schedule at the beginning of the year isn't too much of a bear, but there are some difficult games on there, whether it's NC State, at Florida State, Louisville, the Notre Dame game that you mentioned, Chip, Miami. Even South Carolina at the end of the year with Spencer Rattler might be a bit of a more formidable opponent than we saw from the Gamecocks in the recent season. So I think that this is a Clemson team that could easily go 10-2, but with the total set at 10.5, that's under.
All right, as for the ACC's potential new partner, the Pac-12, last year's champ Utah and the conference jumping Trojans from USC are co-favorites to win the Pac-12 this year. Tom, are you backing Lincoln Riley in his first season in charge of the Trojans?
No, I can't. When I look at this team, like, obviously there's a lot of reasons to be very excited about what Lincoln Riley is bringing to USC. Like, first of all, he's brought Caleb Williams with him. He's bringing Jordan Addison, and he's bringing his offense. So we know that USC is going to be scoring points, and it's going to be exciting to watch. But I think we're too easily overlooking the fact that this was a USC team that went 4-8 last year. It's not exactly a stalwart team, and I understand that some of that was just maybe from guys kind of quitting on the season after your coach is fired and you're dealing with an interim staff and everybody knows that everybody's going to be leaving at the end of the year. But while that offense is still going to be fantastic, the defense was a problem last year, and I don't know what USC has really done to improve that defense. So for me, if I'm making a bet on any of these teams to win the Pac-12, I think Utah should be the favorite, but I would rather bet Oregon simply because in the North, I don't know who their challenger is. I know that Dan Lanning's in his first year as a head coach. Bo Nix has transferred in. I think there's still plenty of talent on that offense. I think defensively there's a ton of talent. They're going to be very strong. And if you look at their schedule, first of all, they don't have to play USC. And if you look at their road slate, it's as easy as you can ask for in the Pac-12. It's Washington State, Arizona, Cal, Colorado, and Oregon State. They get everybody else at home, including UCLA, Washington, and Utah, which might be their biggest games of the year. So when I look around the Pac-12 North, I think Oregon has a much easier path to the Pac-12 championship than either Utah or USC or anybody else in the South do. So I think there's a ton of value there on the Ducks at this price.
Listen, we're going Trojans. We're all in on the hype train. Caleb Williams, whatever, Heisman, sure, give it to him. The offense is going to be one of the best in the country. USC is not going to go undefeated through the regular season. In fact, I think that they're going to lose at Utah and Salt Lake City after starting 6-0. But you know what I'm going to think about? It's what Gary Patterson said back in the Big 12, which is if you get one crack at Lincoln Riley, you might be able to fool him. But if he gets a second look at your defense, you're toast. The way that I see this playing out, USC might take one on the chin from Kyle Whittingham and the Utes, but then they get them back in the Pac-12 championship game. And I think that the defense might be a liability, but the offense is just going to be too daggum good. And that was what we saw with Kyler Murray. That's what we saw with Baker Mayfield. We have seen these Lincoln Riley teams do it before. When the offense is that good, you can still win conference championships, even with the suspect defense.
Got Jordan Addison, the transfer from Pitt. But like you said, they got the Oklahoma transfer, Caleb Williams, under center. Chip likes USC to win the Pac-12. Their win total set at 9. So, Chip, you got to like the Trojans to go over that number then.
Yeah, I've got Notre Dame potentially as a loss, Utah potentially as a loss. It's not going to be just, dancing our way to this over, but I do think that when you look at the rest of the schedule, it sets up perfectly for a new staff and a team full of transfers with all of those manageable games there at the front of the schedule. So it's an easy start to 6-0. Then you get challenged a little bit, you overcome some adversity, and that's where I think that we end up finishing around 10-2, going over. Even if you get a slip up somewhere along the way, you still end up with push. So at around 9, I feel very confident taking the over.
Chip, we finally agree on something. It took the entire segment, but we got there. I'm also on the over with you on the Trojans here. I think that with this total set at 9, you're probably going to push more often than not, but I don't think you're going to lose very much because I don't see this USC team going 8-4. I think we're looking at 9-3 as the most realistic floor with 10-2 and 11-1 as possibilities. So if you're betting either side of this one, you got to go over.
All right, we shall see how that ends up. 52 days away from the start of the college football season. Chip Patterson, Tom Fornelli joining us here on CBS Sports HQ. Thank you, men. Here's a look back at their picks as we take a look at the college football futures. Chip likes Clemson to win the ACC conference. Tom likes Miami. Over under there on Clemson's win total of 10.5. Split on the Pac-12 champ, USC and Oregon, but they both agree that Lincoln Riley and the Trojans will go over their win total of 9 this season. For all things college football, check out the Cover 3 podcast. Host Chip Patterson, joined by Tom Fornelli, Danny Cannell, and Bud Elliott as they take you from National Signing Day to the National Championship with in-depth analysis every week during the season. You get picks against the spread. Loyal listeners will tell you it's one of the best podcasts on the market. The Cover 3 podcast. Download and subscribe today.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.